Okay, so eventually it gets to, let us make man, not a man. Okay, so it's hinting there, make many men, right? Let us make man, not a man, in our image, after our likeness. Note that, it's in his image, God's image, his likeness, his visage, right? And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, etc., etc. The fulfillment of this resolve is recorded in these words. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said, be fruitful, etc., etc. Okay? And it tells them, be fruitful and multiply. You know, get together, do the boing boing, and have some children, all that sort of stuff. Okay, and all was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Yeah, so he's quite pleased with it. It came out exactly how he wanted to. Not that he's a mistake maker, but yeah, he made mistakes in his creation. Work came out, yeah, he was satisfied. Okay, and the evening and the morning were the sixth day, or eon, immeasurable period, unfathomable period, era or day with capital D. Not your 24-hour day. Male and female created he them, and gave them dominion, is the record. Yeah, so there you go. As we said, what's in the Breetah, the Aramaic Breetah, translated into the nearest English equivalent, or Genesis. Male and female created he, God created them, two or more, right? And gave them dominion, the authority, the rule of all the animals, etc. It's the record. There can be no question as to the meaning of these words. They indicate both sexes, as we stated, is in the Breetah, right? He made man and woman. Yeah? Only two genders, male and female. He didn't make male and female, and then a part male, part female, all that sort of stuff, right? No hermaphrodites, all that sort of stuff. They indicate both sexes, and evidently more than one pair, and probably more than one variety. Meaning, you know, like different colours, yeah, etc., etc., different shades. One made a brown man, a black man, you know, yellow man, red man, whatever. As in the other creations, God's comment is the same, or even stronger. Reviewing all his work, he pronounces it very good. The object held in view from the very first had been carried out. Everything had been done satisfactorily. All that he had created had been endowed with the qualities and instincts necessary for their preservation and happiness. And as in the other creations, time had passed. God made the beasts of the earth and cattle and creeping things. He made man. It's not talking about in these separatist or these segregated or these racist cults like Christian identity. Okay, that God made the white man this and that, and then he makes the other men black, red, whatever, non-whites, animals or beasts. We've heard that from a Christian identity member. It's total bogus. Okay? It's not saying that there, that he made them beasts. Well, they're the beasts of the field. Okay, God makes man. Afterwards, we're told afterwards of the care which he formed every plant and herb, every animate and inanimate being. In creating fish, etc., etc., each class were made after their kind, and so forth. Okay, set they're fixed. So we get it again. In creating fish, fowl, beasts, etc., etc., with characteristics suited to the place they were to fill. These were fixed and immovable. We call them instincts. In them there could be no progress. They were made for time. Okay, this is what it's basically saying. Okay, yeah, the fish in the sea, etc., had this instinct, and that's all they had, and they just followed the instinct. Animals, etc., have instinct, so they follow the instinct. Yeah, and just carries on like that right up to this very day. Man, the favoured creation of God, was made apparently the most defenceless, naked, unprotected from the weather, thorns, or wild beasts. and without weapons of offence or defence. In compensation for this apparent neglect, God gave to him an instinct superior to any of the animals. In fact, in himself he combined all. He was more courageous than the lion, more cruel than the tiger, more sagacious than the elephant, etc., etc. This isn't really until well, maybe this particular man, right? This is a pre-Adamic man, we believe. This is not Adam of the Bible yet. In Genesis 2, right? 2:7. Okay? So this particular man was like an animal man. Okay? He was the superior of all the animal creation, and God endowed him with the power of thought which would quicken and enlarge these instinctive faculties. And given this naked, unarmed and unprotected man command over the earth and dominion over everything that moves upon the earth. Okay, so God says, let us make man in our image. We should remember that God speaks not at all, but that it is the author placing the words in the mouth of God as a statement of his own belief or knowledge. This statement is confirmed by the Christ, who tells us that God is our Father and that we are his children. Okay, so, but then again in the Aramaic Breetah, translated in English, or the Genesis in English, it talks about a pre-Adamic man being made before Adam in Genesis 1:26-27, right? Okay, so in the creation of man there is one point that should be especially noticed. The plants, the fishes, birds and animals were each made after their kind, but it is not said so of man. He is not made after his kind, but after a higher kind. He is made in the image of God, in his likeness or similitude spiritually. He partakes, and he goes on about that. Okay, and God was happy with that. There, okay. Okay, it doesn't have here Genesis 2:7. It's not reflecting on that. Okay, it's just using that one verse there. Genesis 1:27, 26-27, where God says, let us make man in our image. He makes two of them, right? Male and female, two genders. He doesn't go on to 2:7 yet. Okay, and he goes down to God's day. On the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. That's God's finished his creation. He's got no more reason to create. And he blessed the seventh day, with that seventh eon period, unfathomable period, and sanctified it, made it holy, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. So he hasn't given the Sabbath to a man yet. Yeah. God's day has neither evening nor morning. It is without beginning, without end. So that's a different day. See, it's got capital D there. God's day. It's different. It's not like our day. God sanctified the seventh day, set it apart for a special, a holy purpose, says the author. Okay, it becomes a holy day. Okay, for man. Okay. While he rested from his long work of preparation, a new succession of events would take place in which the new order of being, or the human being, whom he had created, would be the principal actor. This seventh day or period was dedicated to man. Okay, so eventually this day of God was given to man, right? And then it becomes a certain day of the week, i.e. the Sabbath. This present day of God's rest is the day of man's opportunity. He is just emerging from the long darkness of the evening. The morning is just breaking up upon him. He may have given it to Adam and Eve, but it doesn't say that in the Bible, okay, as far as we know. Okay, he's just emerging from the long darkness of the evening. The morning is just breaking upon him. If this period of God's rest and man's opportunity shall have any relation to the previous periods, man's day has just begun, and tens of thousands of years on this earth are before him for his use and improvement. On the seventh day the following statement is made. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. God's creative work was completed. All this work had been done for one object, one purpose. All the beauty and sublimity of the earth, all animate and inanimate creation had been made for the use of man, the last and highest of his creations, his child, made in his image, and partaking of his nature, the object of his love and care. Okay. Before the world was, God was with his child in thought and anticipation, etc., etc. So the seer closes his account of the creative acts and even with events with the following declaration: they are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they made their created, etc., etc. These are the generations, and so forth. Creation was not accomplished in one day. nor in 6 days of 24 hours, but the word denoted the passage of time marked by successive acts of God's power. So that's what he's saying there. Okay? It's supposed seer. These are the generations, the successive order of creative events, each step of advance being dependent on the work of the preceding period. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and heavens, the use of the word day in this passage shows that our interpretation is correct. Creation was not accomplished in 1 day. This is what he's talking about being correct. Nor in 6 days of 24 hours, or 24-hour periods. But the word denoted the passage of time marked by successive acts of God's power. The author now adds a few explanatory notes. He desires to show that every act of God's creative power was a specific act, that all creations were each and every one distinct and perfectly adapted to the object in view. In illustration, he says that God made every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. Then, led by the association of ideas, he gives a glimpse of the appearance of the earth as it was. This is a seer, the guy with the vision, on the 3rd day, the first of the creative period, when vegetation was at its height, thousands of years before man was created. So, there you go. There's your immeasurable, unfathomable period. Not a day, a 24-hour day, right? Or a day with 24-hour as a 24-hour period. For the Lord had not caused it to rain upon the ground, etc., etc. Now, the author now returns to his previous subject, that of specific creation. His former illustrations having been taken from the inanimate life of that visible world, he now uses man as an example of the work of God in animating creation. He illustrates his meaning by describing these various acts of creation under the image of one similar character. He says, out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field, etc., etc., and every fowl of the air. Again, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The seer, or the guy who had the vision, says that God formed every animal and bird out of the ground, formed them, and then describes God as personally forming man of the dust of the earth. Okay, so prior to the birds being made, he'd already made them. He'd formed them, right? That's what this visionary is supposedly saying. Yeah. So God is personally forming man of the dust of the earth, as a potter would form an image of clay, then breathing upon it and giving it life, thus showing the minute care which God gave the formation of everything which he had created and made. Man's work. On the final day of creation, God says, the author says that God gave 3 commands to man. They were, first, to increase and multiply and replenish the earth. According to this Jordan Maxwell guy, this is his name, he said replenish. It means to do it over again, because there was a great chaos, the tohu and the bohu. Everything, like apparently Jeremiah or one of those prophets of the Old Testament actually saw what the earth looked like in those scriptures, and he says it was beautiful and the people were all happy and all this sort of stuff, but for some unknown reason they all got wiped out. Possibly because of that flood, right? Actually, I think Jordan Maxwell was talking about before Adam and Eve, etc., were created. Something like that, something along those lines. There was these first people that were living on the earth, and they were all living it up, having a good time, and then suddenly, wham, all wiped out, all disappeared. And then the earth, the total earth, wiped out, right? Everything wiped out. It's way before Noah's flood. Everything's wiped out, right? So these ones we're told to replenish or start all over again. Do everything again, right? Multiply, increase, etc., etc. Okay, so man had dominion over the earth, etc. These ones made of the dust. In the commands given, the author expresses God's intention or purpose regarding man. And it was so, shows that the work was done and completed. Every part of the earth had received a variety of man best suited to its peculiarities of situation and climate. Okay, so if it's cold, freezing there, you had the Eskimos. If it's really, really hot, right, skin couldn't handle it, sort of thing. You're probably African, you know, those sort of regions. Okay, they all were fitted in these places, where they could handle it. They're all put there for that reason. As nature's flora and fauna were each and all adapted to the particular locality and climate in which they were placed, so man was distributed in like manner over the earth. They had subdued it, compelled it, etc., etc. So prior to this, it's saying that it's basically dropping a hint that God created a second man out of the dust, out of the ground. The Lord formed man of the dust of the ground, was the first. In Genesis 1:27, it says he was in the likeness of God, the image of God, not from the dust, not made of the dust, all molded from the dust, right, with the ground. Before proceeding further in the allegory, it will be necessary for us to ascertain, if possible, by what means the commands laid upon man to replenish the earth, subdue it, and have control over the animal creation were carried out. What power or force it was that, acting on the uncivilized man, should lead him to fulfill those commandments. The commandments of God. To replenish the earth, multiply and increase, all that sort of stuff. 2. Resume of the formative and creative periods. In the record, we notice that all of the formative and creative periods have passed through the night, and the morning has just opened. The morning of creation only is described by the seer, or the visionary, of the guy who wrote all those text down, right? Created those documents, wrote all down those documents. The various changes in the earth's surface still went on, and so forth. In the record, the author finishes the work of each day before proceeding to the next day of the period. In fact, these days are not distinct and separate periods in which the work of the day is commenced and completed before the beginning of another day. And carries on. Goes on about the different days of creation. On the 5th and 6th days, fish, fowl and animals were created, but these days commenced early in the 3rd and 4th periods and continued for thousands of years, during which there was a constant succession of beasts, birds, fishes, reptiles and plants. So it's over these immeasurable periods, eons, eras of time that all these things happen. Adopted and adapted, etc. Okay, we thus see that the creative processes went on side by side until after the glacial period, since which there have been no new creations so far as known to man. The Assyrian creative legend. When Ashurbanipal, BC 650, caused the ancient Assyrian tablets to be collected, copied and deposited in his library at Nineveh, he also, it would appear, caused some of the ancient legends to be written out, and copies thereof deposited therein. Yeah, he sent his emissaries or messengers out, get me the full copies, or if you can't, get me your copies. Okay? Your copies, whatever. Of these, only scraps of the creative legend have as yet been found. These can be pieced out in part, however, by the few remains we have of Berossus' writings. Well, apparently Henry Layard, Austin Layard, shipped 50,000 cuneiform tablets. Yeah, they would have been a bit broken here and there, yeah. And George Smith helped him to translate them, and that guy's brilliant. It is interesting to note both the points of agreement with and of divergence from the Bible record. It is interesting to note both the points of agreement with and of divergence from the Bible record. So at some points they agree with the Bible records, and at other times they don't. I'm pretty sure that's what they're saying. These tablets are claimed to be the property of Ashurbanipal, king of nations, king of Assyria. Footnote down the bottom. The story of Chaldea in the Story of the Nation series. That might be a good one to look at, if you can find it. The initial statement is, when the heaven above and the earth below were as yet unnamed, not in being or unformed, the abyss and the billowy sea were the beginning of all things. The waters contained the germs of life, the darkness was not lifted from the waters, and there was no growth. So yeah, the abyss or the deep and the sea were the beginning of all things. So that's where it all started from. There's nothing but this sea and this deep pit, right? It's probably where the land sprung up from, according to the scriptures. And God gave the commandment for it to happen. The gods, small g, were as yet unnamed, not yet in being, and did not rule the destinies. The great gods, Anu, Ea and Bel, and the divine host of heaven and earth came into being, and the days stretched themselves out. Anu, the god of heaven, appointed the mansions of Ea and Bel with his own. The signs of the zodiac were the mansions of the great gods. He established the stars and the planets, allotted the night to the moon, and ordered the months and years. The gods, plural, there's more than one, right? Pantheon of gods probably, created the cattle, wild beasts, and creeping things. Berosus says, speaking of the creative legend which he claims to have seen and read, when all was darkness and water, the principle of life was restlessly working in the water, producing monsters, beings like men, some with wings, others with 2 heads, some with legs and horns of goats, others with the body of a horse, bulls with human heads, dogs with 4 bodies and a fish tail. In short, every hideous and fantastic combination of animal forms. All these monsters perished the moment Bel separated the heaven from the earth, creating light. Well, probably because they're all of darkness, right? Because they come out of the sea, this deep sea, the abyss, etc., right? That's probably why they're destroyed. It's like the vampire in the sunlight, right? Because he's of the darkness, creature of the darkness or of the night. When he comes to daylight, he burns, bursts into flames. Another fragment of Berosus says of the creation of man that Bel gave his own blood to be kneaded with the clay out of which men were formed, and that is why they are endowed with reason and have a share of the divine nature in them. In this confused legend, the abyss and the billowy sea were in existence before the gods and were the beginning of all things. Chaos, as pictured in the Bible, is the same as the self-existing waters. There is darkness on the face of the waters. Anu, Ea and Bel were self-existent. Light is created when Anu lifted the darkness from the waters. Sun, moon and stars appear when the days stretch themselves out. Anu appoints the path or mansions of the sun, establishes the stars and planets, and allots to the moon the night. The waters contain the germs of life, an apparent remembrance of the passage, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life. The gods create animal life. Man, when created, partakes of the divine nature. The creation of fish and fowl is not specifically mentioned. We can see that the salient points of the original records have been retained, while the particulars are lost, and the credit of creation is naturally given to their own gods, with little g, the pantheon of gods, the only gods whom they knew. Okay, so basically there, it is verifying that, as we found, that everything started with all these stories, etc., probably came from the Chaldeans, the Hebrew people at the time, that ended up going into Canaan with Abraham. It was a promise by God. Abraham was promised by God, dedicated to the land of milk and honey, or abundance, right? So it all came from there. So possibly these Sumerians, Babylonians, etc., took those stories, they adopted and adapted them, and a lot of them at first were pretty close because they're original stories, but then they decided to change them a little bit, make them more exciting or something. This happened and this happened and this happened. So they basically adopted and adapted it from the originals, which were Chaldean, Hebrew, etc. Whereas we led to believe it was the other way around, that everything was borrowed from the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Akkadians, etc. Quite the reverse.